The scent of freshly baked bread and sizzling garlic filled the air as Chef Daniel worked his magic in the kitchen. The dinner rush was at its peak, and every plate had to be perfect. He moved with precision, his hands a blur as he garnished a delicate pasta dish. But even in the chaos, he couldn't help but steal a glance toward the back door. There, curled up in a makeshift bed of towels and blankets, was Bella, the stray dog who had somehow become a part of his life. She had wandered into the restaurant months ago, shivering and hungry. Daniel had given her food, thinking she would move on, but she never did. Instead, she stayed, watching him from a distance, her gentle eyes filled with trust. Over time, he noticed something changing. Bella wasn't just eating more. Her belly was growing. At first, he thought it was just a normal pregnancy, but something about it didn't sit right with him. The weight gain was rapid, almost unnatural, and then there were the moments when she whimpered softly in her sleep, as if something was wrong. Concerned, Daniel took her to the vet, expecting to hear that she was just carrying a large litter. But as the ultrasound screen flickered to life, the doctor's face drained of color. His hands trembled, and then, before he could even explain, he collapsed right there on the floor. Daniel's heart pounded. What had the doctor seen? And what was happening to Bella? Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the unconscious doctor. The vet's assistant rushed forward, kneeling beside him, shaking his shoulder. "Dr. Mitchell, are you okay?" she cried, her voice panicked. Bella let out a soft whimper from the examination table, her large brown eyes darting between the humans in the room. She didn't understand what was happening, but she could sense the tension. Daniel forced himself to move. He crouched beside the vet, feeling helpless. A moment later, Dr. Mitchell groaned and blinked rapidly, trying to regain focus. His face was pale, and sweat glistened on his forehead. What did you see?" Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Mitchell swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the table for support. As he sat up, he turned toward the ultrasound screen, which was still frozen on the last image. Daniel followed his gaze and felt a shiver run down his spine. The screen showed a mass inside Bella's belly. Something large, something that didn't look like normal puppies. The shapes were unclear, but there was something unnatural about them. Dr. Mitchell took a shaky breath. This isn't a normal pregnancy," he murmured. Daniel clenched his jaw, trying to process the words. "What do you mean? Is she sick? Is it some kind of deformity?" The vet rubbed his face, struggling to find the right words. "I don't know yet, but whatever's inside her, it's not what I expected. We need to do more tests immediately." Bella whined again, shifting uncomfortably on the table. Daniel instinctively reached out and stroked her head. "She's in pain, isn't she?" Dr. Mitchell nodded grimly. "Yes, and we need to figure out why before it's too late." The next few hours were a blur. Blood tests, more scans, discussions Daniel barely understood. The vet called in a specialist, an older man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes who arrived in a hurry. He studied the scans, his brow furrowed in concern. "This doesn't make sense," the specialist muttered. "The growth rate is too fast. And look here." He pointed to the screen, outlining something with his finger. "This doesn't look like a normal fetus at all." Daniel's stomach twisted. "Then what is it?" The specialist hesitated before responding. "I have a theory, but I don't want to alarm you yet. We need to prepare for surgery. It might be the only way to save her." Daniel's heart pounded. Surgery? That meant whatever was inside. Bella was serious, possibly life-threatening. He glanced at her, watching the way her breathing had become heavier. She was growing weaker by the minute. A sudden thought hit him. What if she hadn't wandered into his restaurant by chance? What if she had come to him because she knew she needed help? But help from what? As the night wore on, the tension thickened. The doctors worked tirelessly, preparing everything for the procedure. Daniel stayed by Bella's side, stroking her fur, whispering reassurances. Then, just as they were about to move her into the operating room, something happened that made everyone freeze. Bella let out a low, guttural growl, something she had never done before. Her body tensed, and her eyes widened as if she was terrified. The room fell silent. Then, without warning, she yelped in pain, and her entire body jolted violently. And that's when Daniel saw it. A strange, unnatural movement rippling beneath her skin. Something alive, something struggling to get out. His blood turned to ice. This wasn't just an unusual pregnancy. This was something else entirely. Something no one was prepared for. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears as he stepped back, eyes locked on Bella's trembling body. The unnatural movement beneath her skin sent a wave of fear through the room. The doctors stood frozen, eyes wide, waiting for the next moment, unsure of what they were witnessing. Bella let out a weak whimper, her body shuddering violently. Then, with a final desperate cry, she collapsed onto her side, panting heavily. The specialist snapped into action. "We need to operate now," he shouted, his voice filled with urgency. Daniel watched, helpless, as they rushed to move Bella onto the operating table. He wanted to do something, anything to help, but all he could do was step aside and watch. The vet's assistant pushed him toward the waiting area, but he refused to leave. "I'm staying," he said firmly, his eyes never leaving Bella. The specialist gave him a brief nod before making the first incision. The air was thick with tension as the doctor carefully worked, sweat forming on his brow. Every second felt like an eternity. Then, as he pulled back a layer of tissue, his hands suddenly stopped. A stunned silence filled the room. What is that?" the assistant whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel leaned in, his stomach twisting in knots. He could barely process what he was seeing. Inside Bella's belly, instead of normal puppies, there was something else, something twisted, malformed. At first, it looked like a cluster of small misshapen bodies, but then the specialist gasped. They're still alive." One of the tiny figures moved, twitching slightly under the bright surgical light. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a puppy. It barely resembled anything he could recognize. But there was something deeply wrong. Dr. Mitchell, still pale from earlier, stepped closer. This is not natural." The specialist hesitated. "I don't know what caused this, but we need to remove them before they harm Bella any further." The next few moments were intense. The doctors worked quickly, removing the strange, undeveloped creatures one by one. Some were already lifeless, while others showed faint signs of movement, but they were weak. Whatever they weren't meant to survive. Daniel's heart ached for Bella. He had thought she was going to be a mother, that she had come to him for help. Now he realized she had been suffering all along, her body forced to carry something that should have never been there. The doctors finished the procedure, carefully closing the incision. Bella's breathing was slow but steady. She had made it through the surgery. Daniel ran a hand over his face, overwhelmed. "Will she be okay?" he asked. Dr. Mitchell nodded, though his face still carried a look of unease. "She's weak, but she's strong. With time she should recover." Relief flooded Daniel, but questions still burned in his mind. What caused this? The specialist sighed, removing his gloves. "We may never know for sure. It could have been a rare genetic condition, a failed pregnancy, or something caused by environmental toxins. Whatever it was, it's over now. Daniel looked down at Bella, her eyes barely open, but there was a softness in them, a silent thank you. He gently stroked her head, feeling the warmth of her fur. She had been through so much, but she had survived. Days passed, and Bella slowly regained her strength. Daniel stayed by her side, feeding her, taking her on short walks, and making sure she was never alone. The bond between them grew even stronger, a silent understanding passing between them. One evening, as they sat outside the restaurant, watching the sunset, Bella nudged his hand and licked his fingers. Daniel smiled. "You scared me, you know, that," he murmured. She wagged her tail weakly, her eyes filled with warmth. Whatever had happened, whatever she had been through, it didn't define her. She was still Bella, kind, loyal, and full of life. And no matter what, Daniel knew one thing for sure: she had found her home.